Good evening, the Congressional Ball, black tie, crystal chandeliers reflecting light across marble floors, conversations measured in careful tones, power condensed into a single room where senators, donors, strategists, lobbyists all gather not to celebrate but to position, to assess, to watch. And last night, in that room, Donald Trump made a statement about his son, Barron. Not policy, not strategy, not foreign affairs. A personal remark, dismissive, public, and the room went silent. Witnesses described the moment as brief. Trump speaking in his usual volume, confident, unfiltered. The comment landed sharp, not affectionate banter between father and son, not playful teasing that families share privately. This was different. This was assessment delivered as verdict, and everyone near enough to hear understood immediately what they were witnessing. A fracture, not in policy, not in administration, but in the structure that power families depend on. Unity of image, coherence of brand, succession without question. From a realist perspective, the perspective that examines power through hierarchies, through how leaders signal strength or weakness, through how political structures maintain control, this moment matters. Political families are not families in the traditional sense. They are enterprises. They are brands. They are structures designed to project continuity, competence, inevitability. And those structures depend on internal cohesion. Public displays of respect signal that cohesion. Public displays of dismissal signal cracks. Barron Trump has remained largely outside the political spotlight. Unlike his older siblings who campaigned, who appeared at rallies, who took positions in previous administrations, Barron stayed back, stayed quiet, stayed out of view. But absence creates curiosity. And in political circles, curiosity becomes assessment. Donors began asking questions. Not openly, not directly, but questions nonetheless. Who represents the future? Who carries the movement forward? Who inherits the brand when the current leader steps back? These questions make leaders uncomfortable, especially leaders whose entire identity rests on dominance, on being the center, on controlling every narrative. Trump has never allowed competing centers of gravity within his political universe. Loyalty is currency, praise is reward, and anyone who threatens centrality, even implicitly, even through simple existence as alternative, faces the response that maintains hierarchy. Public dismissal, public reminder of who holds power. At the Congressional Ball, surrounded by people who understand optics better than most, Trump chose to assert that dominance, chose to make clear that no alternative narrative would be permitted, not even one involving his own son. The comment was not accidental, was not slip of tongue, was calculated assertion that the Trump political brand belongs to Trump alone. That succession, if it happens, happens on his terms. That speculation about alternatives will be answered with public reminders of who commands attention. The reaction in the room was immediate. Conversations paused. Aides shifted positions subtly. Donors exchanged glances that communicated without words, because everyone present understood what they witnessed. Not family drama, strategic signaling, a leader enforcing hierarchy in front of an audience that needed to see enforcement, that needed to understand where power sits, that needed to stop wondering about alternatives and remember who controls the present. Political strategists began circulating clips within hours, not for scandal value, for analytical value, because moments like this reveal decision-making patterns, reveal priorities, reveal whether a leader understands that long-term power requires managing succession narratives carefully or whether ego overrides strategic thinking. And what the moment revealed was preference for immediate dominance over long-term structural stability. From power politics standpoint, this creates vulnerability. Political families rise when they project continuity. when they convince donors, supporters, voters that the movement extends beyond single individual, that the brand survives transitions, that investment in the family today pays returns tomorrow. But when a leader publicly diminishes potential successors, when hierarchy enforcement becomes more important than succession planning, doubts emerge, quiet doubts, unspoken doubts, but doubts that accumulate. Donors began asking different questions after last night. Not about Barron specifically, about structure, about whether the Trump political enterprise has depth beyond Trump himself, about whether investments made today retain value if the brand cannot transition smoothly. These are questions donors do not ask publicly, but they ask them privately. And private questions shape private decisions about where money flows, where support concentrates, where power migrates. Washington operates on signals, on moments that reveal character, judgment, strategic thinking, and last night's moment signaled that Trump prioritizes personal dominance over institutional building, prioritizes maintaining singular control over developing successor capacity. This is not irrational. This is how leaders who built everything themselves often think. They cannot imagine the structure functioning without them, cannot tolerate alternatives, even theoretical ones, cannot share spotlight even with family. But political movements that depend entirely on single individuals are fragile, are vulnerable to time, to health, to electoral loss, to any variable that removes the individual from center. And fragility makes investors nervous, makes strategists cautious, makes allies begin considering what happens when the center cannot hold, because the center refused to build supporting structures that could hold it. The room last night contained people who understand these dynamics professionally, who assess power structures for living, who make decisions about support based on sustainability analysis. And what they saw was leader enforcing dominance at cost of sustainability, choosing immediate control over long-term viability. And that choice tells them something about how Trump thinks, about what he values, about whether his political enterprise can outlast him, or whether it remains entirely dependent on his personal presence. This is not about family relationships, not about father-son dynamics in emotional sense. This is about power, about how power is maintained, transferred, institutionalized, about whether political movements build depth or remain cults of personality. And cults of personality, history shows consistently, collapse when personality exits. They do not transition smoothly, they fracture, compete for succession, lose coherence. The silence in the room after Trump's comment was not shock at rudeness, was recognition of what the comment signaled about structural weakness, about leader who cannot tolerate even hypothetical alternatives, who must dominate every conversation, every room, every narrative, even when dominance creates problems for long-term positioning. And recognition of structural weakness is what changes donor calculations, strategic assessments, power alignments. Tonight, the Congressional Ball footage circulates not in public media, but in private channels, among people who make decisions about political investments, among strategists who model future scenarios, among operatives who understand that moments of personal behavior reveal strategic priorities. And what they see in that footage is leader who chose ego over institution, chose personal dominance over succession planning, chose immediate control over sustainable power structure. This matters not because Barron's feelings were hurt. Matters because political enterprises require thinking beyond single election cycle, require building structures that survive individual leaders, require managing succession narratives that convince investors the movement has future beyond present. And what happened last night signals that Trump either does not understand these requirements or does not care about them because his identity depends entirely on remaining singular center. The room went quiet. The conversations paused. The donors exchanged looks. And in that silence, in those pauses, in those looks, Washington saw what it needed to see. Saw a leader who cannot share power even theoretically. Saw structure built entirely around single individual. Saw vulnerability that donors and strategists will factor into their calculations about where to invest, where to commit, where to position for whatever comes next. This is realist analysis. This is how power operates. Not through public declarations, but through private signals. Not through policy statements, but through behavioral reveals. And last night, Trump revealed priorities. Revealed that dominance matters more than succession. That control matters more than continuity. That ego matters more than institution. And those reveals tell Washington everything it needs to know about the sustainability of the Trump political enterprise beyond Trump himself. The ball ended. The guests departed. The moment passed. But the signal remains in donor minds, remains in strategist assessments, remains in operative calculations about where power sits today and where it might sit tomorrow. Because in politics, the smallest moments often reveal the biggest truths. And last night's small moment revealed truth about leader who built everything on personal dominance and cannot imagine, cannot tolerate, cannot permit any alternative, even when alternatives might strengthen rather than threaten the enterprise he built.